Hello and welcome to another episode of Crushing Comics. I'm your host, Peter, and we're here to fall in love with my comic book collection all over again. I have one right here to unwrap. And as we're unwrapping it, the thing I was going to talk about is things we kind of dimly remember from our childhoods. Because I have this shirt on. It's from like a TV kids game show. I don't even know what it is. I bought this because my coworkers were on a team at like a retreat, and they're like, oh, the green team, we should be the gold monkeys from I think it's called Legends of the Hidden Temple. And I was a little bit too old to remember that, but I was like, okay, sure. But it made me think of like all of those kind of like kid TV things I used to watch when I would get home and I would just like turn on the television after school at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And, I remember watching Double Dare, and I remember watching some other thing where, like, the kids would compete, and at the end they had to go through this big kind of American Gladiators type thing with, like, all foam cushions and flags they had to grab. I don't even remember what it's called. And for that matter, I remember things like American Gladiators, right, which I just thought was the coolest. Like, if there was an American Gladiators marathon on a Saturday afternoon, my butt would be parked, and I would be watching American Gladiators. And, like, to what extent is your child's mind elevating how cool these things were? Have you ever gone back and like watched, like what is one of these things that you remember like getting home from school and watching on TV or, you know, watching on the weekends when you're at home? And do you remember it really, or do you just have this conception of how you were excited as a kid to consume it? Because, you know, part of nostalgia, part of what led me to collect a lot of these comics is that fond remembrance of things that we had as a kid, right? That's what drives nostalgia, whether it's nostalgia for books or toys, or even if you decide to collect antiques or you want to have plates like you used to have at your grandmother's. It's connected to this feeling of like newness that you had as a kid when you heard or saw something for the first time. And the analogy that I always think of to describe that is the first time you ever heard that laser sound, like that. A lot of people heard it for the first time in Star Wars. Other people heard it for the first time from like a G.I. Joe cartoon. But whenever you first heard it, that like locked into place that sound for you in your memory. And every time you hear a laser gun sound like that, you always remember that thing from that point forward. And so like anything that has that, like if you watch a movie now that's like a modern sci-fi movie and it has that very like, and you're like, kind of gun sound, it like hits you in that nostalgia spot. And so this shirt hit my coworkers in that nostalgia spot, and I didn't have that. And I like watched a clip of the show. I was like, okay, well this show is okay, I guess, because I didn't have that built-in nostalgia for it. So I don't know. I guess I was just wondering, like, is there something that you had as a kid that you have that for, and have you revisited it and did it hold up? Like I revisit that kind of stuff all the time. I watched one of the original She-Ra cartoons, which I was obsessed with She-Ra. It's another topic, but not great in retrospect. What do we have here? This is Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, volume number 1. So we still somehow, if you can believe it, have one more of these Kung Fu books to open. This Deadly Hands was the magazine format Kung Fu book, whereas Master of Kung Fu was Shang-Chi's book. So we've covered this a little bit in the past, but this was a magazine that covered a lot of just like general interest Kung Fu stuff that also had black and white, mostly in continuity comics inside of it that starred not just Shang-Chi, but in the one that I happen to have opened to, it seems like also White Tiger. Yeah. So I'm so fascinated by this. You know, after opening the last few, I went back and did a little bit of reading about Bruce Lee, right? Because it was the Bruce Lee Kung Fu phenomena that made Marvel want to do this, and ultimately a lot of the article content in these books reflects a lot of information and writing about Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee is an example of something that he had a very brief career, and we venerate it now, which is not a value judgment from me about if he was great or not great, but he really only made a pretty limited number of movies. Of course, he had a lot of experience and talent that went beyond just the movies that he made, but it wasn't like today. You know, I feel like if there's somebody who's hot today, they get so, like, franchised so quickly. Like, I think about it like a television show like Glee. And once they realized it was a hit, they put out albums every 3 months, and the kids went on tour, and there was a spin-off reality show. Like, something that has a deep interest in it now gets gets multiplied very quickly because people want to create all of this material for it. It's really hard in the modern day to conceive of the idea of this like hidden genius type person who only is around and making something for a very limited amount of time and then dies. I think that's part of why you know, people have so much mystique with musicians who die at a young age, especially, you know, the so-called 27 club, where musicians like die at the age of 27 of overdose or health problems or whatever. And, you know, like Amy Winehouse only has 2 proper full-length albums. And I think that, you know, then that franchising effect happens after they're dead, as they're like, people are scrambling through the vaults being like, what else is there by this person that we can use and put out there? But in the modern day, there is stuff in those vaults. And in the past, sometimes that little bit creative burst that that person had was all there was. So I thought what would be interesting to do this time around is actually read you something from one of these issues. Because I have no idea what this article content is. So I've opened to Deadly Hands of Kung Fu #3 from August 1974. And this title is called Angela Mao, A New Superstar Rises. Which, like, how cool is that? That there's this feature article about this female Kung Fu star. I will tell you, I know nothing about Kung Fu, so this is all completely new to me. So here's a little bit about this. The Chinese do have a star system within their film industry, not dissimilar to the star systems of the once great Hollywood studios in the 30s and 40s. They have their Humphrey Bogarts, their Errol Flynns, their Katharine Hepburns, and Spencer Tracy's, their Gary Coopers, and their Olivia de Havillands. And you can bet that these Chinese superstars are quite well off. A little bit further down. Her style is curious. You may notice that she uses her feet much more than almost anyone in any of the other Kung Fu films. Her particular style is called, according to my sources, Hapkido. So this is, you know, it's interesting that even though there's a certain, like, outsider mystique of like, oh, they have stars in the Chinese cinema as well, that Marvel was actually bringing information that was not necessarily available to them about this Kung Fu craze that was more than just parroting Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee. This was not like the equivalent of like Tiger Beat, but for Kung Fu. And the next article here, actually, it's made me laugh. It's called Sweep Your Way to Victory, about the advanced foot sweep. So like Marvel's actually and they've got illustrations too of Kung Fu moves in these magazines. So let's just keep looking through this, shall we? This is my last chance to do this, since this is the last one of the magazine style omnibuses that we're going to be opening. So let's just talk about what's inside this omnibus. The Dragon Has Entered Part 2. So this is fiction. It's prose fiction by Don McGregor, I think. Or maybe it's a summary of a movie? Yeah. That's interesting. What else is there? The Rising and Advancing of a Spirit, an 11th hour editorial by Tony Isabella. Welcome to Marvel Comics' first annual Kung Fu special. If you've been with us for a while now, you know we also publish a monthly magazine. So this is like an article all about why he's writing the magazine. Well, that's interesting. Their fans were a known quantity with often voiced likes and dislikes, but the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu had gotten us into a whole new thing, a whole new readership. I freely admit that I didn't have much affinity for Kung Fu stuff at its onset, me neither. I was not a fan of the Kung Fu television show. I didn't contribute to the first issue of the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, aside from enjoying the Master of Kung Fu comic mag. In fact, I was totally outside the genre. And he goes on to say that he found the same kind of excitement in Kung Fu as he did in Pulp Fiction heroes like Roy Rogers, Doc Savage, Flash Gordon. So kind of a tie to that Fear Agent stuff that we opened last time. Let's see, what else? And then, of course, there are some comic books in here. Let's page a little bit farther ahead. This was all 1974. Let's time travel to 1975. Well, the text got a lot smaller. I can't emphasize enough that my interest here, and it maintains, is this black and white art. This story, The Crack of the Whip, in issue 12, written by Bill Mantlo and with art by George Perez. I mean, this art is magnificent, and it's black and white. You know, you don't get a lot of chances to see pure black and white from the 70s. So this issue This next issue has Legend of the Black Tiger, a candid interview with Ronald Van Cliff, actor, stuntman, martial arts choreographer, and black belts, who was also a black man. So, that's a little look into what's in this book. It is unusual. And you know, last time I was quite bold in saying, I'm never going to read these articles. But actually, maybe I would read them a little bit. I think if I had this book out and I had a reason that I was looking for reading the comic issues, it's the same thing as letters pages to me, right? Like, I love letters pages, and it annoys me in modern collections that they don't collect them, because the letter page is what tells you what was happening around the comic book at the time. Like, you don't understand, did fans like it or not? Was it popular or not? Who was the character that they were romanticizing the most? What was the context in the world? And you don't know if you don't read the letters pages. And there you get the creators actually talking back to people, and you get a little bit of sense of what's happening behind the comic. And when we get comics now that don't have that in them and don't have like the recap pages or anything, it's this very like homogenized story out in space, and that's great because we can just enjoy the story for what it was, but it does take away the ability to give it any kind of context. And so I love things that include the context, and I've really been enjoying reading some digital stuff lately of new comic books that include the letter pages, because it lets me know things about the books that maybe I'm missing as a critical reader. And so it's exciting for me to have a book like this where you can go back and not only read letter pages, but read whole articles about what Kung Fu meant at the time and how the Marvel creators were just starting to understand Kung Fu and come to Kung Fu. But again, in order to want this, you have to be somebody who already cares about Kung Fu, just generally cares about like media from the 70s and interested in that kind of thing, or really loves Marvel's like 70s post-Silver Age comic books, because this is not a general interest title. So that's my story. So this is The Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, Volume 1, and we still have to open one more. We have to open Master of Kung Fu number 2. Heaven only knows what I'm going to talk about when we get to that one. But here we are with Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, the classic cover, because that is always my preference when they look this cool. And we are going to ceremonially shelve it right now. Hopefully it'll fit right here next to its friends. Oh, I don't think it will. Okay, we'll just put it over here. Oh, I didn't even say the words. This is the ceremonial shelving of The Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, Volume 1. So join me again next time as we continue to work our way through an ever-dwindling amount of wrapped books that I brought with me from Philadelphia to Wellington here on Crushing Comics. Thank you so much for watching.